Snow fell mercilessly across the church steps as Catherine Owens burst through the heavy oak doors, her white wedding gown billowing behind her like a sail caught in a storm. The bitter cold of the Colorado December night slapped against her flushed cheeks, but the sting of betrayal burned hotter than any winter chill ever could. Through eyes blurred with tears, she spotted him, Thomas Vance, tall and resolute atop his chestnut stallion at the edge of the church property, exactly where he promised he'd be. Fort Lyon, Colorado in 1876 was no place for a broken heart, especially on a night when the temperature plummeted below anything the townsfolk had seen in years. Catherine's breath came in ragged clouds as she gathered the expensive satin of her dress, purchased by a man she'd never loved, and fled down the icy steps. Behind her, voices rose in confusion. The wedding guests, Fort Lyon's wealthiest citizens, had just witnessed the daughter of Judge Owens leave banker Harold Whittaker at the altar. Her father's thunderous shout cut through the night. "Catherine Elizabeth Owens, you come back here this instant." But Catherine was already running, her silk slippers sliding dangerously across the frozen ground. Her fingers, bare and reddening in the cold, clutched desperately at her skirts. "Cat!" Thomas's voice reached her through the whirling snow. He extended his gloved hand, his eyes reflecting the determination of a man who'd risked everything. "Now or never, darlin'." For 3 years, they had kept their love hidden, the poor rancher's son and the judge's daughter. Secret meetings by the creek, whispered promises under starlight, and plans made in desperate whispers. Until Catherine's father had arranged her marriage to the town banker, a man 30 years her senior with cold eyes and cruel hands. "They're coming," she gasped, as the church doors slammed open again. The wedding party spilled out onto the steps, Harold's enraged face visible even through the thickening snow. Thomas's strong arm hooked around her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto the saddle in front of him. "Hold tight," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her frozen skin. The stallion reared, then bolted forward into the white wilderness that surrounded Fort Lyon. Catherine clung to Thomas as they rode, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. Her wedding veil tore free, dancing away on the wind like a ghost, the last remnant of the life she was leaving behind. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," Thomas said, his arms secure around her waist as he guided the horse through the deepening snow. "I made you a promise," she answered, her voice steady despite her trembling body. "I would never marry a man I didn't love." The plains stretched before them, vast and unforgiving under winter's blanket. Fort Lyon disappeared into the darkness behind them, and with it, all the expectations and constraints that had threatened to suffocate Catherine's spirit. "We need to reach the cabin before this storm worsens," Thomas said, pressing his cheek against her hair. "Your father will have men searching by dawn." The cabin he spoke of belonged to his late uncle, nestled in the foothills 3 hours' ride from town, their sanctuary and first step toward the life they'd dreamed of together. A life of their own making. "I don't care if we have to ride to California," Catherine replied, feeling a strange freedom despite the cold seeping through her inappropriate attire. "I'm never going back." The stallion pressed onward, its powerful muscles straining against the elements. The temperature continued to drop, and Catherine's wedding dress, designed for a church and reception hall, offered little protection. Her body began to shiver violently against Thomas. "We need to stop," he finally said, concern edging his voice. "There's a line shack half a mile east. It's not much, but it'll shield us until dawn." Catherine nodded weakly, her lips too numb to form words. The adrenaline that had carried her from the church steps was fading, leaving her vulnerable to the merciless cold. The lined shack appeared like an answered prayer, a small, weathered structure almost hidden in a cluster of pine trees. Thomas dismounted quickly, lifting Catherine from the saddle. Her legs buckled beneath her, and he caught her against his chest. "Stay with me, Cat," he murmured, kicking the door open and carrying her inside. The shack was bare but offered blessed shelter from the howling wind. A small iron stove sat in one corner, and Thomas wasted no time laying Catherine on a dusty bedroll before working to light a fire. His fingers, stiff with cold, struck a match 3 times before the kindling caught. "We have to get you out of that dress," he said, the orange glow of the newborn flame illuminating the worry in his eyes. "You'll freeze to death otherwise." In any other circumstance, such words would have brought a blush to Catherine's cheeks. But survival trumped propriety as Thomas helped her fingers work the many buttons down her back. The elaborate wedding gown symbol of everything she was fleeing fell away, leaving her in a thin chemise and petticoat. Thomas turned away, gentleman to his core despite their dire situation, and pulled a wool blanket from his saddlebag. "Wrap yourself in this. I'll tend to Thunder and be back." While he secured his horse in the small lean-to attached to the shack, Catherine huddled near the stove. The reality of what she'd done was beginning to settle over her. By morning, she would be the scandal of Fort Lyon. Judge Owens's daughter, who humiliated Harold Whitaker, the man who held mortgages on half the farms in the county. The man whose proposal her father had accepted on her behalf, ignoring her tears and protests. Thomas returned, stomping snow from his boots. He carried something bundled in his coat. "Found these hanging in the lean-to," he said, offering her a pair of men's trousers and a flannel shirt. "They're not fancy, but they're dry." Catherine took them gratefully. "Turn around," he complied without hesitation, keeping his back to her while she changed. The clothes smelled of dust and horses, but they were blessedly warm and dry. "You can look now," she said, rolling up the 2 long sleeves. When Thomas turned, something shifted in his expression. Gone was the worry, replaced by a soft wonder as he took in the sight of her Judge Owens's proper daughter in a workman's clothes, her elaborate wedding hairstyle coming undone, pins dropping one by one to the rough wooden floor. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said simply. The cold forgotten, Catherine crossed the short distance between them and placed her palm against his cheek. "I love you, Thomas Vance. I have since the day you pulled me from Miller's Creek when I was 16. He covered her hand with his own. "And I've loved you since the moment you thanked me, then promptly lectured me about proper water safety, soaking wet and shivering." Their laughter mingled in the warming air of the shack, and for a moment, the peril of their situation faded away. "Will you build a life with me, Catherine Owens?" Thomas asked, his voice low and serious. "It won't be easy. Your father is a powerful man. We might have to leave Colorado altogether." "I would go anywhere," she answered without hesitation. "A life without love is no life at all." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the urgency of long-denied affection. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily, foreheads pressed together. "When this storm breaks," Thomas said, "we'll ride to Denver. I have a friend there, a horse trader. He'll give us fair prices for Thunder and help us buy passage west." "California?" Catherine asked, thinking of the stories she'd heard of orange groves and endless summer. "Oregon," he corrected. "Rich soil, good rainfall, we could have a farm of our own, build something together." The thought filled Catherine with a yearning so intense it almost hurt. A home of their own making, children running through fields they had planted, growing old together under the same roof. Everything she had dreamed of but never thought possible with Harold Whitaker. Outside, the wind howled louder, snow pelting the small windows like tiny fists demanding entry. But inside the humble line shack, Catherine had never felt safer or more certain. "We should sleep," Thomas said, adding more wood to the fire. "Tomorrow will be a long ride." They made a bed of Thomas's bedroll and Catherine's discarded petticoats. Propriety suggested they should maintain distance, but survival demanded shared warmth. They lay together beneath the wool blanket, Catherine's head pillowed on Thomas's shoulder, his arm protective around her waist. "I never thought I'd be lying beside a woman in a wedding dress she wore for another man," Thomas murmured into her hair. Catherine smiled against his chest. "I never thought I'd run from my own wedding. Life is full of surprises." His low laugh rumbled beneath her ear. "Sleep, Cat. I'll keep you safe." As Catherine drifted towards sleep, exhaustion finally claiming her, she wondered what her father was doing now. Was he organizing a search party despite the blizzard? Was he raging at her betrayal or worried for her safety? Perhaps both. Judge Robert Owens was not a man accustomed to being defied, especially by his only daughter. Morning came with blinding brightness, sunlight reflecting off pristine snow that covered the landscape in a blanket of white. Catherine woke to find Thomas already up, rekindling the fire. "The storm's passed," he said when he noticed her stirring. "But we've got at least 3 feet of fresh snow out there." Catherine sat up, running fingers through her tangled hair. The elegant coiffure from yesterday was completely undone, long auburn waves falling past her shoulders. "Will Thunder be able to manage it? He's a strong horse, but we'll need to give him frequent rests. It'll slow us down." Thomas's expression was troubled. "Your father's men will be looking for us." "The snow will cover our tracks," Catherine pointed out, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Thomas nodded, but the worry remained in his eyes. "We should start soon. I managed to find some jerky in my saddlebag. Not much of a breakfast, but it'll keep us going." They ate in companionable silence, the gravity of their situation settling over them like the snow outside. Catherine knew they were beyond the point of return now. Even if she wanted to go back, which she didn't, the scandal would be irreparable. Running away on her wedding day would never be forgiven by Fort Lyon society. "What are you thinking?" Thomas asked, noticing her pensive expression. Catherine looked up at him, at the face she'd loved for years, at the eyes that had always seen her as she truly was, not as the judge's obedient daughter. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They packed what little they had and prepared to leave. Catherine folded her wedding dress and left it on the shack's small table. "You're not taking it?" Thomas asked, surprise evident in his voice. "It must have cost a fortune." Catherine shook her head. "It was never mine. It was just another thing my father bought to make me into what he wanted." Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes. He nodded, then helped her into his spare coat before they stepped out into the blinding white world. Thunder snorted and stamped in the lean-to, eager to move after the confinement of the storm. Thomas checked the cinch on the saddle, then lifted Catherine up before mounting behind her. "Ready?" he asked, his breath visible in the frigid air. Catherine nodded, leaning back against his solid presence. "Ready." The going was slow through the deep snow. Thunder struggled in some places, forcing Thomas to dismount and lead him through the deepest drifts. By midday, they had covered perhaps half the distance they would have managed on clear ground. "We need to rest him," Thomas said as they paused in the shelter of a stand of pine trees. "And eat something ourselves." Catherine slid from the saddle, her borrowed trousers now damp to the knees from snow. "How much further to Denver, at this pace? 3, maybe 4 days." Thomas frowned as he rubbed Thunder's neck. "We'll need better supplies than what I packed for a quick escape. There's a trading post about 10 miles ahead. We could reach it by nightfall if the trail improves." Catherine nodded, then stiffened as a sound carried through the clear winter air. Distant but distinct the bark of hounds. Thomas heard it too, his head snapping up. Tracking dogs. Your father must have brought them in from the Carlson ranch. Fear coiled in Catherine's stomach. Judge Owens was not merely sending a few men to bring his daughter home, he was hunting them like criminals. How far behind? She asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Thomas listened intently, years of working the range having taught him to read sounds across distances. 3 miles, maybe 4. The snow is slowing them just as it's slowing us. What do we do? Thomas's eyes met hers, determination hardening his features. We change our course. Head west into the foothills. The terrain is rougher, but it might throw the dogs off. And Denver, Catherine asked, we'll circle back. It'll add days to our journey, but it's better than being caught. He helped her back onto Thunder. Hold tight. We're going to move faster now. They pushed on through the afternoon, the sound of the hounds growing and fading as the wind shifted. Thomas guided Thunder through increasingly difficult terrain, skirting rocky outcroppings and forcing paths through dense pine forest. As dusk approached, they emerged onto a ridge overlooking a valley Catherine had never seen despite growing up in Fort Lyon. A small stream, not yet entirely frozen, cut through the center. We'll stop here, Thomas decided. Thunder needs rest, and we need to get warm and dry. They made camp in a small cave formed by an overhanging rock. Thomas built a fire well back from the entrance, positioning it so the smoke would dissipate through small fissures in the rock, rather than signaling their location. You think we've lost them? Catherine asked as they huddled close to the flames. Thomas's expression was grim. For now, but your father won't give up easily. Why does he hate you so much? She asked, the question that had burned within her for 3 years finally finding voice. Is it just because your family doesn't have money? Thomas was silent for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. It's more than that. Your father and mine had a history, bad blood from before either of us was born. What happened? Catherine pressed. My father caught yours cheating at cards in a saloon in Denver, called him out publicly. Thomas's voice was matter of fact. Your father was a young lawyer then, building his reputation. The accusation could have ruined him. Instead, he turned it around, claimed my father was lying to cover his own debts, used his connections to have my father blacklisted from every ranch and mine in 3 counties. Catherine stared at him in shock. I never knew. My father had to start over with nothing in Fort Lyon. Built our ranch acre by acre, working himself to death to provide for my mother and me. Thomas's eyes reflected the dancing flames. Your father became a judge and never looked back. Probably thought he'd buried the past for good until you and I met at Miller's Creek. The revelation settled over Catherine like a heavy weight. Her father's irrational hatred of Thomas, his insistence that she marry Harold despite her obvious unhappiness, it all stemmed from a decades-old grudge against a man who had dared to tell the truth. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Thomas shook his head, taking her hand. You have nothing to apologize for, Cat. You're not responsible for your father's sins. No, she agreed, but I understand now why he was so determined to keep us apart. It wasn't just about money or status. It was about control and revenge. They sat in silence for a time, the crackling of the fire and the occasional whinny from Thunder the only sounds. We should sleep, Thomas finally said. We'll need to move before dawn. Catherine nodded, exhaustion settling into her bones. Despite the difficult day and the uncertainty ahead, she felt strangely at peace. The truth, however ugly, was preferable to the lies and manipulations that had defined her life in Fort Lyon. They settled close together near the fire, sharing body heat beneath the single blanket. Catherine tucked herself against Thomas's side, her head on his shoulder. Thomas, she murmured, sleep already pulling at her. When we get to Oregon, I want to plant apple trees. His chest rumbled with quiet laughter. As many as you want, Cat, I promise. Dawn had barely broken when Thomas woke her, his expression tense. The dogs, they're closer. Catherine sat up, instantly alert. Outside the cave, the world was still dim, caught in the gray light between night and day. How did they find our trail? She asked, scrambling to her feet. Fresh snow fell while we slept, makes tracking easier. Thomas was already packing their meager supplies. We need to move now. They emerged from the cave to find Thunder pawing nervously at the ground. The stallion sensed the hunting party's approach even before his human companions. Thomas helped Catherine into the saddle, then vaulted up behind her. We'll follow the stream. The water might confuse the scent. They urged Thunder down the slope toward the valley floor. The stream, partially frozen but still flowing in the center, cut a winding path through the snow-covered landscape. Your father must have offered a substantial reward, Thomas said as they rode. Those men are tracking us through conditions most would consider too dangerous. Catherine felt a twist of guilt. Her actions had put Thomas in danger, the man who had done nothing but love her honestly and completely. I'm sorry I've brought this trouble on you, she said quietly. Thomas's arms tightened around her waist. I knew what I was risking when I waited outside that church, Cat. I'd do it again without hesitation. They rode in the shallow water where possible, Thunder picking his way carefully over slippery rocks. The sound of the dogs grew fainter, then louder again as the wind shifted. By midday, they had put several miles between themselves and their pursuers, but Thunder was tiring. The cold water and difficult terrain were taking their toll on the stallion. There's smoke ahead, Catherine suddenly noticed, pointing to a thin gray line rising above the trees perhaps a mile downstream. Thomas tensed behind her. Could be trouble. Could be help. We don't have many options either way. They approached cautiously, leaving the stream bed to circle through the trees. As they drew closer, a small cabin came into view, weathered logs and a stone chimney, a thin tendril of smoke rising from it. Wait here, Thomas instructed, helping Catherine dismount in the shelter of the pines. He approached the cabin alone, hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Catherine held her breath as he knocked on the door. After a long moment, it creaked open to reveal a gray, bearded man in a worn buckskin jacket. Words were exchanged that she couldn't hear. Then Thomas waved her forward. This is Ezra Collins, Thomas explained as she approached. He's a trapper, says we're welcome to rest here. The old man eyed Catherine curiously, taking in her men's clothing and disheveled appearance. Ain't often I get visitors, especially not in weather like this. And never such a pretty young lady. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Collins, Catherine said, offering her hand. I'm Catherine Owens. Recognition flickered in the old man's rheumy eyes. Judge Owens's girl, the one that was supposed to marry that banker fella yesterday. Catherine's heart sank. News traveled fast, even to remote cabins. Yes, she admitted, seeing no point in lying. Ezra scratched his beard thoughtfully. Heard some men talking about it when I was checking my traps this morning. Said the judge is offering $500 for information. Thomas tensed beside her, hand drifting back toward his gun. But Ezra just laughed, a wheezing sound like leather creaking. Don't look so worried, son. I ain't about to turn in a couple of youngsters just trying to make their own way. Never much cared for the judge myself. Relief washed over Catherine. The men you heard, were they close? About 3 miles northeast, I reckon, following the ridge. Ezra gestured them inside. Come on in. Got a stew on the fire and coffee brewing. The cabin's interior was cluttered but warm. Pelts hung from the rafters, and various tools of the trapper's trade lined the walls. A pot bubbled over a well-maintained fire. "Sit, sit," Ezra urged, waving toward a rough-hewn table. "You both look half-frozen." As they thawed by the fire, sipping strong black coffee, Ezra studied them with shrewd eyes. "So where you two headed?" "Denver," Thomas replied. "And then Oregon Territory." Ezra nodded approvingly. "Good land out there, I hear. Plenty of opportunity for folks willing to work hard." He ladled stew into wooden bowls and set them on the table. "Eat up. You'll need your strength." The stew rabbit and wild onions with a handful of dried corn was the most delicious thing Catherine had tasted in days. They ate in grateful silence while Ezra tended to thunder outside. "Your horse needs rest," he announced upon returning. "Fine animal, but he's near spent. You won't outrun those tracking dogs on him, not today." Thomas's face fell. "We can't stay. We'd be putting you at risk." Ezra waved away his concern. "Got a plan if you're willing to hear it." By nightfall, the plan was in motion. Thunder rested in Ezra's small stable, while the old trapper showed Thomas and Catherine a hidden cellar beneath his cabin floor. "Root cellar," he explained, lifting the trapdoor, "but it'll serve as a hiding place well enough. If those men come sniffing around, they won't find you here." The space was cramped and musty, but lined with furs that would keep them warm. Ezra provided a small oil lamp, jerky, and water. "Thank you," Catherine said fervently as they prepared to descend. "We'll never forget your kindness." Ezra's weathered face softened. "Been alone a long time out here. Nice to help somebody now and then." They settled in the cellar, the trapdoor closed above them, listening to Ezra moving around the cabin. Catherine leaned against Thomas, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Do you think his plan will work?" she whispered. Thomas's arm tightened around her shoulders. "It's our best chance. Ezra knows this country better than anyone." The plan was simple but clever. Ezra would lead Thunder several miles south, creating an obvious trail, then release the horse to make his way back to the cabin via a different route. With luck, the tracking party would follow the false trail, giving Thomas and Catherine time to slip away. Hours passed in tense silence. Occasionally, they heard Ezra moving overhead, the creak of floorboards marking his path across the cabin. Catherine dozed fitfully against Thomas's shoulder, exhaustion overcoming her fear. She woke to his hand gently covering her mouth, his eyes wide with warning. Voices filtered through the floorboards above, unfamiliar, male, demanding. "Seen a man and woman come through here." The voice was gruff, authoritative. "Young fella, dark hair, girl in men's clothes, riding a chestnut stallion." Ezra's reply was convincingly puzzled. "Ain't seen nobody in 2 weeks. Been trapped in by the snow. Judge Owens says they might have headed this way." "Well, they ain't been here." Ezra's tone turned irritable. "Now, if you boys are done questioning an old man, I got traps to check before dark." There was murmuring, then the sound of boots moving across the floor. Catherine held her breath, her heart hammering so loudly she feared they might hear it through the floorboards. A dog barked suddenly, the sound unnervingly close. "What's that cellar for?" the gruff voice asked. "Root storage," Ezra answered easily. "Nothing down there but potatoes and such. Dogs probably smelling the rabbit I skinned earlier." More murmuring, then footsteps moving away. The cabin door opened and closed, and silence fell. Catherine and Thomas remained frozen, afraid to move or speak. Minutes stretched painfully until the trapdoor finally lifted, revealing Ezra's relieved face. "They've gone," he reported. "Heading south, following the trail I left. But they'll be back when they realize it's false. You need to move tonight." They emerged from the cellar, stiff and anxious. Outside, darkness had fallen, and fresh snow was beginning to drift down. Perfect timing, Ezra said, nodding at the sky. "Snow will cover your tracks." Thunder had returned as planned, exhausted but ready. Ezra provided them with additional supplies: furs, jerky, a compass, and a crude map drawn on a piece of hide. "There's an old mining settlement here," he said, pointing to a mark on the map. "Not much left, but there's a church with a preacher still living next to it. Man named Reverend Wilson. Tell him Ezra sent you. He'll help you get proper married and on your way to Denver." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the old man's thoughtfulness. "How can we ever repay you?" Ezra smiled, revealing missing teeth. "Live a good life together. That'll be payment enough." They set off under cover of darkness, following Ezra's directions to travel northwest away from both Fort Lyon and the false trail he had created. The fresh snow fell gently around them, erasing their presence from the wilderness. Thomas led Thunder on foot, the terrain too treacherous for riding in the darkness. Catherine walked beside him, one hand on the stallion's neck for balance. "What Ezra said," Thomas began hesitantly after they'd put some distance between themselves and the cabin, "about getting properly married." "Is that what you want, Cat?" Catherine stopped, turning to face him in the gentle snowfall. "Are you proposing to me, Thomas Vance?" Even in the dim light, she could see his smile. "I reckon I am. Though I always pictured doing it somewhere a bit more romantic than a snowy forest with tracking dogs on our heels." Catherine laughed softly, the sound carrying in the still night air. "I don't need romance. I just need you." She stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face. "Yes, I will marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever we find that reverend." His kiss was warm despite the cold night, a promise of all the days to come. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "Let's go find that mining settlement," Thomas said, taking her hand. "I'm eager to make you Mrs. Vance before your father can send any more dogs after us." They traveled through the night, stopping only when Thunder needed rest. The snow continued to fall, obscuring their trail and muffling the sounds of the forest around them. By dawn, they had covered nearly 10 miles, following Ezra's map toward the abandoned mining settlement. The sun rose to reveal a landscape transformed pristine white in every direction. Trees bowed under the weight of snow, the world silent and still. Catherine, exhausted but determined, trudged forward beside Thomas. "Look," he said suddenly, pointing to a distant hill. "Smoke." Sure enough, a thin column of smoke rose against the pale morning sky. The mining settlement was close. They approached cautiously, alert for any sign of pursuit. What had once been a busy mining town was now largely abandoned, collapsing wooden structures. The skeleton of a stamp mill, empty doorways like hollow eyes. But at the far end of what had been the main street, a small church stood with its steeple still pointing skyward. Beside it, a modest cabin showed signs of habitation, the source of the smoke they had spotted. Thomas led Thunder toward the cabin, Catherine close beside him. Before they could knock, the door swung open to reveal a tall, thin man with kind eyes and a shock of white hair. "Reverend Wilson?" Thomas asked. The man nodded, studying them with open curiosity. "Indeed, and who might you be, travelers?" "Thomas Vance and Catherine Owens. Ezra Collins sent us." Thomas's voice betrayed his exhaustion. "Said you might be willing to help us." Understanding dawned in the Reverend's eyes. "Ah, Ezra. Good man if a bit wild. Come in, come in. You both look dead on your feet." The cabin was simple but comfortable, a far cry from the opulence Catherine had grown up with, but warmer somehow. A woman appeared from the back room, gray-haired and plump, her face lined with the wisdom of years. "Martha," the Reverend said, "these young people need our help. They've traveled far in difficult conditions." Martha Wilson took one look at their bedraggled state and immediately bustled into action. Sit by the fire. I'll make tea and find something for you to eat. You're half-frozen, child," she added, taking Catherine's cold hands in her warm ones. As they thawed by the fire, Thomas explained their situation: the wedding Catherine had fled, her father's pursuit, their plans to reach Oregon. "And we hoped," he finished, "that you might marry us before we continue our journey." Reverend Wilson stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Your father is Judge Owens, the same Judge Owens who sentenced 3 men to hang last spring in Fort Lyon." Catherine nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. Her father's reputation for harsh justice was well known throughout Colorado Territory. "I see." The Reverend exchanged a look with his wife. "And you're certain this is what you want, young lady? To leave your family and the life you've known?" "More certain than I've ever been of anything," Catherine answered without hesitation. "I love Thomas. I have for years. My father forbade our relationship and arranged a marriage to a man I could never love." Martha clucked sympathetically. "Forcing a girl to marry against her, well, that's no Christian act, judge or no judge." The Reverend nodded slowly. "I agree. Love is God's greatest gift. To deny it for reasons of pride or status goes against his teachings." He smiled suddenly. "I would be honored to join you in marriage." Relief washed over Catherine. "Thank you, Reverend." "But first," Martha interjected practically, "you both need rest, food, and forgive me, dear, but you could use a proper bath and clean clothes." Catherine laughed, suddenly aware of her disheveled state. "I can't argue with that." The Wilsons proved to be gracious hosts. Martha heated water for baths and found clothes that would fit Catherine's simple but clean dresses left by their daughter who had married and moved to California years before. Thomas was given fresh trousers and a shirt, and both were fed a hearty meal of venison stew and cornbread. As the day progressed, Catherine found herself growing increasingly nervous, not about marrying Thomas, but about the ceremony itself. She had no wedding dress, no flowers, none of the trappings she had been raised to expect on her wedding day. Martha found her sitting alone by the window, watching snow fall gently outside. "Having second thoughts, child?" Catherine shook her head quickly. "No, never about Thomas. Just, this isn't how I imagined my wedding day." The older woman sat beside her, taking Catherine's hands in her own. "When I married Jacob, it was during a drought. The crops were failing and everyone was worried about surviving the winter. We had no fancy clothes, no big celebration, just us, his parents, and God." Her eyes crinkled with the memory. "Been married 42 years now, and I wouldn't change a thing." Catherine squeezed the woman's hands gratefully. "You're right, it's not about the trappings." "That said," Martha added with a twinkle in her eye, "a bride should have something special on her wedding day." She disappeared into the back room, returning with a small wooden box. From it, she removed a simple silver pendant on a delicate chain. "My mother's. I'd like you to wear it." Tears sprang to Catherine's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "I couldn't possibly. Nonsense. Consider it borrowed. When you're settled in Oregon, you can send it back." Martha fastened the necklace around Catherine's neck. "Every bride needs something borrowed, something new, something old, something blue." By late afternoon, preparations were complete. The small church, though dusty from disuse, had been swept clean. Reverend Wilson had found candles to light the altar, and Martha had arranged pine boughs to bring color and fragrance to the simple space. Catherine stood at the back of the church, heart pounding with anticipation. She wore one of Martha's daughter's dresses, plain blue cotton, far from the elaborate satin gown she had abandoned at the line shack. But as she looked toward the altar where Thomas waited beside Reverend Wilson, she knew this simple ceremony meant infinitely more than the lavish wedding her father had planned. Martha gave her arm a gentle squeeze. "Ready, my dear," Catherine nodded, suddenly eager, more than ready. She walked alone down the short aisle, eyes fixed on Thomas. His face when he turned to see her, the wonder, the love, the certainty was something Catherine knew she would remember until her dying day. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Wilson began as Catherine reached Thomas's side. "We are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They had no rings to exchange, so Thomas offered a promise instead. "Catherine Owens, from the first moment I pulled you from Miller's Creek, soaking wet and lecturing me about safety, you've held my heart in your hands. I pledge to love you, protect you, and build a life worthy of you for as long as I draw breath." Catherine blinked back tears as she responded. "Thomas Vance, you truly saw me when everyone else saw only the judge's daughter. I promise to stand beside you through whatever trials come our way, to love you faithfully, and to create a home filled with joy and honesty." "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Wilson pronounced with evident pleasure, "I now declare you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Thomas's kiss was gentle and reverent, sealing their vows in the flickering candlelight of the abandoned mining church. They spent that night in a small room the Wilsons prepared for them, their first as husband and wife. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in peaceful white. "Mrs. Vance," Thomas murmured, drawing Catherine close beneath the quilts. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," she answered, resting her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Absolutely perfect." Morning brought clear skies and a difficult parting. The Wilsons provided them with additional supplies for their journey: food, warmer clothing, and a small Bible as a wedding gift. "Denver is 4 days' ride south," Reverend Wilson advised as they prepared to depart. "Stay off the main trails. Your father's men will be watching them." "We can never thank you enough," Catherine said, embracing Martha warmly. The older woman patted her cheek affectionately. "Live well and love deeply. That's thanks enough." They set off with renewed hope, the marriage certificate tucked safely in Thomas's coat. Thunder, rested and fed, moved with fresh energy through the snow-covered landscape. "What do you think your friend in Denver will say when you arrive with a wife?" Catherine asked as they rode. Thomas laughed, his arms secure around her waist. "Samuel Bridges is not a man easily surprised. But I imagine even he will raise an eyebrow at this development." They traveled cautiously, avoiding settlements and keeping to the wilderness where possible. Each night, they made camp together, sharing the simple intimacy of husband and wife conversations by firelight, plans for their future, the comfort of each other's arms against the cold. On the 4th day, Denver appeared in the distance, a sprawling settlement that dwarfed Fort Lyon, with brick buildings and bustling streets despite the winter weather. "We'll need to be careful," Thomas warned as they approached the city limits. "Your father's influence might reach here too." They entered the city as dusk fell, when shadows would help conceal their identities. Thomas guided Thunder through back streets to a modest stable on the outskirts of town. A burly man with a thick mustache looked up from his work as they entered, his weathered face breaking into a grin of recognition. "Thomas Vance, as I live and breathe. Heard you might be dead or in jail, depending on who was telling the tale." Thomas dismounted, helping Catherine down before clasping the man's hand. "Samuel, good to see you, old friend." Samuel Bridges's eyes widened as he took in Catherine. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "My wife," Thomas said with unmistakable pride. "Catherine, this is Samuel Bridges, the best horse trader west of the Mississippi and the most trustworthy man I know." Samuel whistled low. "Wife, last I heard you were sweet on Judge Owens's daughter but figured that was a lost cause." His eyes narrowed suddenly. "Wait a minute. Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private," Catherine suggested, glancing nervously at the open stable doors. Understanding dawned in Samuel's expression. "Of course. Come on back to the house. Myra's got stew on, and you both look like you could use a hot meal." Samuel's home was attached to the stable, a cozy two-story structure that smelled of cooking and leather. His wife, Myra, a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes, welcomed them without question, serving hearty stew and fresh bread. Only when they had eaten did Samuel lean back in his chair, fixing Thomas with a serious gaze. "Now, suppose you tell me why Judge Owens has men watching the Denver stagecoach office and the railroad station." Thomas and Catherine exchanged alarmed glances. "He's here?" Catherine asked, her voice tight with fear. Samuel shook his head. "Not that I've seen, but his men are. Showed up 3 days ago with descriptions of you both and a substantial reward for information." "We need passage west," Thomas explained. "Oregon Territory as soon as possible." Samuel stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Train's out of the question. They're watching it too closely. Stagecoach the same." A slow smile spread across his face. "But I happen to be sending a string of horses to Salt Lake City day after tomorrow. My man Jenkins is driving the remuda. He could use a couple of assistants." Relief washed over Catherine. "You do that for us, for Thomas?" "Absolutely." Samuel's expression grew serious. "He saved my life during that blizzard in '71. I owe him more than I can repay." "We can pay our way," Thomas insisted. "I've got money saved and Thunder's worth." Samuel waved away his protest. "Keep your money. You'll need it to start your life in Oregon, and keep Thunder too. That stallion's carried you this far. Seems wrong to separate you now." Plans were made over the next hours. They would leave with Jenkins and 20 horses bound for a buyer in Salt Lake City. From there, they could join a wagon train heading to Oregon in the spring. "You can winter in Salt Lake," Samuel advised. "Jenkins has family there who can put you up until the mountain passes clear." That night, in the small guest room Myra prepared for them, Catherine lay awake long after Thomas had fallen asleep. The reality of what they had done, what they were doing, settled over her with fresh clarity. They had left everything behind. Her father, her home, the life she had known. For a future that was uncertain at best, dangerous at worst. And yet, as she listened to Thomas's steady breathing beside her, she felt no regret. Only a quiet certainty that they were on the right path. Dawn had barely broken when Samuel woke them. "Change of plans," he said urgently. "Jenkins spotted men asking questions at the Silver Dollar Saloon last night. Mentioned both your names. We need to move you today, not tomorrow." They dressed hurriedly, gathering their few possessions. Myra pressed a package of food into Catherine's hands, her eyes worried. "Be careful," she whispered, "and right when you're settled. I want to know you're safe." Jenkins, a weathered cowboy with a laconic manner and shrewd eyes, met them at the stable. "Horses are ready," he reported. "We'll head out the north trail, then cut west. Less chance of being seen that way." They left Denver as the city was just beginning to stir, a string of horses moving quietly through the morning mist. Catherine rode Thunder, while Thomas took a sturdy bay gelding from Samuel's stock. Jenkins led the way, the remaining horses strung out behind them in a remuda line. "Thank you," Catherine said to Samuel as they prepared to depart, "for everything." The horse trader tipped his hat. "You two just focus on building that life you're running toward. That'll be thanks enough." The journey west was arduous but liberating. Days blended together in a rhythm of riding, making camp, tending horses, and moving on. Catherine, who had never spent more than a day on horseback before fleeing Fort Lyon, developed calluses and muscles she never knew she needed. Jenkins proved to be a good companion, quiet but observant, sharing his knowledge of the trail and teaching them both skills they would need in their new life. "You handle yourself well for a judge's daughter," he commented one evening as Catherine efficiently built their campfire. Most city women would be complaining by now. Catherine smiled, striking the flint against steel. "I've always been a disappointment to my father that way. Too interested in practical things, not enough in being decorative." "Their loss," Jenkins said simply. "Oregon's going to suit you just fine." As they traveled farther west, Catherine began to feel the weight of Fort Lyon and her father's influence falling away. No more looking over their shoulders, no more fear of pursuit. They were truly forging their own path now. The mountains rose before them, majestic and challenging. Jenkins guided them through passes still treacherous with late winter snow, sharing stories of travelers who had not been so fortunate. "Donner Party tried to cross too late in the season," he told them one night as they huddled around the fire. "Mistake you only make once." Salt Lake City appeared in the distance after nearly 2 weeks of travel, a sprawling settlement nestled between mountains and the vast Salt Lake that gave it its name. Jenkins, a boy of perhaps 12, came running as they approached the outskirts of the city. "Ma said to watch for you. Said you'd have horses and maybe company." Jenkins ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "Thomas, Catherine, this is my nephew Daniel. His family will be putting you up while you're in Salt Lake." Daniel led them to a modest but well-maintained home where Jenkins's sister, Sarah, and her husband, Robert, welcomed them warmly. "Any friends of Jenkins are welcome here," Sarah said, showing them to a small but comfortable room. "He says you're heading to Oregon come spring." Thomas nodded, his hand finding Catherine's. "Planning to start a farm, new beginnings." Sarah's eyes softened with understanding. "Most folks who come west are looking for exactly that." She smiled. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow Robert can help you find work for the winter. Can't have you eating our food for months without contribution." The winter months in Salt Lake City passed more quickly than Catherine would have imagined. Thomas found work at the livery stable, his way with horses quickly earning the owner's respect. Catherine, to her own surprise, secured a position teaching at the small school, her education at Miss Porter's seminary finally serving a practical purpose. They saved every penny, planning carefully for the journey ahead and the land they hoped to purchase in Oregon's Willamette Valley. "Apple trees," Thomas reminded her one snowy evening as they sat by the fire in their small rented room, poring over maps and travelers' accounts of Oregon. "You wanted to plant apple trees." Catherine smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "A whole orchard and a vegetable garden. Maybe raise some sheep." "Sheep," Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Thought we were going to be cattle ranchers." "We can do both," she replied, the future unfolding in her imagination, a white farmhouse, fields of grain, children running across green pastures. Their children. As winter released its grip on the mountains, preparations for the journey to Oregon intensified. A wagon train was forming, due to depart in early April, 50 families and individuals seeking new beginnings in the rich lands of the Northwest. Thomas and Catherine purchased a wagon and supplies, investing most of their savings in the tools and seeds they would need to establish their farm. Thunder and the bay gelding, now named River, would pull their wagon, carrying them the final leg of their journey to freedom. The night before their departure, a letter arrived delivered by a traveler just arrived from Colorado Territory. Catherine's hands trembled as she recognized the handwriting on the envelope. "It's from my father," she whispered, showing Thomas. They sat together on their narrow bed, the unopened letter between them like a physical manifestation of the past they had fled. "You don't have to read it," Thomas said gently. "We've made our peace with leaving that life behind. Catherine shook her head. "No, I need to know what he says." With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper. "Catherine," the letter began without preamble, "your mother's health has declined precipitously since your departure. The doctors say it is her heart, but I know it is heartbreak that afflicts her. She asks for you constantly." Catherine's breath caught. Her mother, Elizabeth Owens, had always been a gentle counterpoint to her father's stern authority, a quiet woman who rarely defied her husband openly, but who had, in small ways, encouraged Catherine's independence. "I continue to believe you have made a grave error in judgment," the letter continued. "However, your mother's condition compels me to offer terms. Return to Fort Lyon alone, and I will arrange an annulment of your association with Vance. You will be welcomed home without public censure, and your mother's final days will be eased by your presence." Catherine looked up at Thomas, tears blurring her vision. "He says my mother is dying." Thomas's face reflected her pain. "Do you believe him?" She hesitated. Her father was a proud, controlling man, but would he lie about something so serious? "I don't know, but if it's true and I don't go." Thomas took her hands, his expression solemn. "If you need to return to Fort Lyon, I understand. I won't stand between you and your mother." The magnitude of his love struck Catherine anew that he would let her go, risk losing her, to ease her conscience. "No," she said finally, crumpling the letter. "If my mother is truly ill, my father would have sent a doctor's letter, something official. This is just another attempt to manipulate me." Thomas searched her face. "Are you certain?" Catherine nodded, her resolve strengthening. "My father had years to listen to me, to see me as a person with my own heart and mind. He chose not to. I've made my choice, Thomas. You are my family now." She tossed the crumpled letter into the fire, watching as the flames consumed her father's words. With them burned the last vestiges of guilt and uncertainty. Tomorrow, they would join the wagon train. Tomorrow, they would continue their journey toward the life they had chosen together. Dawn broke clear and cold on the day of departure. The wagon train assembled on the outskirts of Salt Lake City, a long line of covered wagons, horses, oxen, and people filled with hope and trepidation. Catherine and Thomas took their place in the line, their wagon loaded with the tools of their new life. Thunder and River stood patiently in their harnesses, seemingly eager for the journey ahead. Sarah and Robert came to see them off, bringing Daniel, who had grown attached to Thomas during the winter months. "Write to us when you're settled," Sarah urged, embracing Catherine. "Let us know you've found your place." "We will," Catherine promised. "Thank you for everything." The wagon master's call rang out across the gathering, and the train began to move slowly at first, then with gathering momentum as wheels found their rhythm on the well-worn trail. Catherine sat beside Thomas on the wagon seat, her hand in his as they left Salt Lake City behind. Ahead lay the vast expanse of wilderness, mountains to cross, rivers to ford, and beyond them, the green valleys of Oregon where they would build their future. "No regrets?" Thomas asked softly, glancing at her profile as she gazed ahead. Catherine turned to him, her face alight with certainty and hope. "Not one," she answered, squeezing his hand. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." The wagon train moved westward, carrying Thomas and Catherine Vance toward the life they had risked everything to claim. Behind them lay the constraints of society, the weight of expectations, and the bitter cold night when a bride had fled her wedding to find the man waiting for her on horseback. Ahead lay Oregon and all the promise of tomorrow. Epilogue: 5 years later, apple blossoms drifted like snow across the front yard of the white farmhouse, overlooking Oregon's Willamette Valley. Catherine Vance stood on the porch, a sleeping infant cradled in her arms, watching as Thomas chased their 3-year-old son James through the orchard they had planted in their first year on the land. The farm had flourished beyond their wildest expectations. The fertile soil yielded abundant crops. Their small herd of cattle and flock of sheep provided wool and meat, and the apple orchard Catherine's special project was now producing fruit that local merchants declared the sweetest in the territory. "Mama," James called, breaking free from his father's grasp and running toward the porch, his dark hair so like Thomas's tousled by the spring breeze. "Papa says the new foal can be mine when it's bigger," Catherine smiled, shifting baby Elizabeth in her arms. "Does he now?" "And will you take good care of it?" James nodded solemnly. "I promise. Like Papa takes care of Thunder." Thomas joined them on the porch, breathing heavily from the chase. At 30, he had grown even more handsome, his face tanned from working outdoors, laugh lines beginning to form at the corners of his eyes. "That boy's faster than a jackrabbit," he complained good-naturedly, dropping a kiss on Catherine's cheek before gently touching his daughter's downy head. "How's our little lady?" "Finally asleep," Catherine replied. "She's stubborn, this one, just like her father." Thomas laughed. "I seem to recall a certain bride who fled her wedding and rode through a blizzard rather than marry a man she didn't love. That takes some stubbornness, too." The memory, now softened by time and distance, brought a smile to Catherine's lips. "Best decision I ever made." The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the long drive leading to their farm. A rider approached the mail carrier who visited once a week, bringing news and letters from the wider world. "Afternoon, Vance's," he called, dismounting at their gate. "Got something special for you today." Thomas descended the porch steps to meet him, accepting a thick envelope and thanking the carrier before returning to Catherine's side. "It's from Denver," he said, examining the return address. "Samuel Bridges." They had maintained correspondence with Samuel and Myra over the years, exchanging news of their lives and the changes in the territories. Samuel's last letter had mentioned expansion of his horse trading business and the possibility of a visit to Oregon. Thomas opened the envelope, scanning the contents quickly before looking up at Catherine with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" she asked, a flutter of concern rising in her chest. "Samuel included a newspaper clipping from Fort Lyon," Thomas said carefully. "Your father passed away last month. Heart failure." Catherine stared at him, a complex wave of emotions washing over her. Judge Robert Owens had never responded to the letter she had sent after James's birth, attempting one final reconciliation. His silence had been answer enough. "There's more," Thomas continued gently. "Your mother is traveling to Denver. Samuel says she's asked to visit us." Tears sprang unexpected to Catherine's eyes, not for her father, whose controlling presence had nearly defined her life's path, but for the possibility of reunion with her mother, and for the years that could never be reclaimed. "She's welcome here," she said firmly. "This is our home. We have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of." Thomas nodded, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "I'll write to Samuel tonight, tell him to arrange her passage." That evening, after the children were asleep, Catherine stood at the window of their bedroom, gazing out at the moonlit orchard. The apple trees she had insisted on planting were silhouetted against the night sky, strong, rooted, bearing fruit. Thomas joined her at the window, his arms encircling her waist. "Thinking about your father," Catherine leaned back against his chest. "Thinking about choices. His, mine. How differently life might have unfolded if I hadn't run from that church. Any regrets?" Thomas asked, echoing the question he had posed 5 years earlier as they left Salt Lake City. Catherine turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had loved through blizzards and hardship, through childbirth and triumph, through every day of building their life together. "Not one," she answered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "This life, our life, is everything I ever wanted." Outside their window, the apple trees stood witness to their embrace, branches reaching toward the stars, roots deep in the soil of the land they had claimed as their own. A testament to what can grow when love is given room to flourish. In the distance, thunder, now aging gracefully in the pasture, nickered softly to river. The sound carried on the night breeze, a reminder of the snowy night when a desperate bride had fled into the frozen darkness, finding freedom in the arms of the cowboy waiting with his horse outside.